We're going to continue to talk about trusting Jesus. So this is a springboard off the last couple of messages. You know, we said we gain wisdom by trusting Him when we have faith and we execute a few things. I mean, first, just trusting the Lord as a believer. And if you're not a believer, let me just say this. Hang in here with me this morning, because I've got something for you too, all right? But as a believer, it's just wise to trust God in everything, to go to Him in every situation. And we know first, we've learned this in the past couple of weeks, the beginning of wisdom is a healthy fear of the Lord. But also we know we get wisdom by doing several things in our lives, by putting Him first in everything in our lives. And when we get godly people into our lives, He uses those people to make us wiser. And then when we practice God's Word, once we learn it, once we understand it, we put it into play in our lives, then God just blesses us. I mean, we're never more like God than where we're the image of Jesus. When we look in the mirror and we see Jesus and not ourselves. All right? Now, one of the ways that we build faith and learn to trust God is to learn and deal with and handle temptation in our lives. Because you're always going to be tempted. You're going to have to learn how to deal with temptation. And I want to start by saying this. A lot of times we get bogged down by our problems. All right? I mean, at some point we have to get to the place where it can't always be about the problems in our lives. All right? Now we have to learn to live above our problems. Our problems have purpose. We know that. We understand that. We can be grateful for them, especially on the other side. It's hard to be grateful for a problem, especially a severity or something that catches you off guard right in the middle of it. But on the other side of it, we understand that they have purpose and that God uses them in our lives for the good. He works them into His plan for our lives. But our perspective has to become this, is that problems and the different circumstances that we face, they must become opportunities for us. They have to become opportunities for us. And at some point we have to say, okay, I want God's favor in this. I want God's best for me in this. And I want His blessing on my life more so over and over and over again. All right? And at some point, I mean, look, we have to be excited about our future. Either you believe the best is yet to come or you don't. And you've got to get there where you do. Okay? And it can't always be about our problems and woe is me. You know, I have to embrace God's purpose for my life. And when you do that, you know, you ask a few questions like, what inspires you? You know, what cranks your tractor, since we live in the South here, all right? You know, but what are your passions? What are your heart's desires? You know, what are your abilities? What are your experiences? Those things we know make up our shape in life, which cause us to lean into our purpose. And I have to ask, okay, how can I use all these things to achieve God's purpose in my life? So that I'll be happy, so that I'll be more than reasonably happy, if you will. And you know what? If you learn all of these principles and you start applying them, everything that we've been sharing with you since this church began, our promise is that we're going to give you some practical things every single week. You're going to walk out of here knowing how to live the rest of this day and the rest of this week until we come back together again as a congregation. I mean, look, we need to be growing in our faith. And this is what I'm getting at, all right? When we begin to live above our problems, all right, and we begin to learn temptation, how to handle temptation, we begin to see God show up and we begin trusting Him more and more and more. But let's be honest, okay? Most of us self-sabotage ourselves. We do. And we begin to blame God and we begin to blame others. And we have a hard time trusting Him because of our own actions, all right? When we're the ones who cause the problem. You know, we blame the devil a whole lot of times and give him a whole lot of credit when we just make some poor choices in life. We do. And we say things like, well, why did God do this? Or, why didn't God show up when this happened? God can do one of three things. All right? He can change your circumstances, He can change you, or He can change both. But more often than not, He wants to change you. And this is certain. This is what the Bible teaches us. God never leaves us without hope and without help. There's an answer for everything in your Bible. There is, okay? And He teaches us how to live, especially when we're under stress. And that's why we've been looking at the book of James since the beginning of the summer. It's a book that teaches us how to deal with hard times. And if you're having a difficult time, making some tough decisions, some hard decisions, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to the last couple of messages. One of them is entitled Vote, all right? Watch the first part of that. If you want to hear all of it, watch the first part. It's about making tough decisions. And then last week we talked about having faith when we're faced with tough decisions. Go back and see those things, all right? Now, one of the things that happens when we're under stress is we start looking for an easy way out. How many of you know this is true? And you don't have to raise your hand. Unfortunately, those things can make things worse in our life. They honestly can, because a lot of times they're unhealthy. They're unhealthy choices. And the Bible has a lot to say about the distractions, the disturbances, our problems, if you want to call these, our temptations. It's what I want to drill down on. Has a whole lot to say about it. God gives us some wise advice on how not to be tempted by self-defeating behaviors. And that's what I want to talk about this week, because those tendencies, especially in times of stress, and let's just call them what they are. They're bad habits. They're bad habits. All right? They're the things that we do that comfort ourselves, that are self-soothing, if you will, when we get anxious, when we get stressed, when we get worried, when we get fearful. It's our go-to. All right? Now, we're going to look at how to develop and deepen our faith this morning by countering those bad habits. All right? Now, let me first begin by reading what James tells us about temptation, because temptation is where our problems all have their origins, every single one of them, and they become footholds. They can. So let's see what James says. In James chapter 1, I believe we have this, yes. Starting in verse 13, if we are tempted by such trials, we must not say first, this temptation comes from God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and He Himself tempts no one. But we are tempted when we are drawn away and trapped by our own evil desires. Now that term evil desires, it actually translates to this. All right, it just means bad habits from the Greek. That's what it means. It means lustful desires, impulses, things that move me away from God. That's what he's talking about. They're not necessarily evil like murder and those type of things, all right? But then he goes on to say, he says, then our evil desires conceive and give birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to what? Death. Death. All right, so do not be deceived, dear friends. Do not be deceived. God has a lot to say about temptation, not just in the book of James, but I want to point this out to you. All right, God's not left us powerless. Now we're to live and walk in the Spirit. Okay, but here's the deal: we're made in the image of Jesus, the Creator. So we're both human and spirit. All right, so we're not powerless. All right, in fact, God tells us that He's given us the same power that raised His Son from the dead. All right, but let's look at 1 John, where he tells us this. Every child of God can defeat the world, and our faith is what gives us the victory. Our trust in Him is what gives us victory. No one can defeat the world without having faith in Jesus. Nobody. As believers, okay? This is why we're talking about faith. This is why we're talking about trusting God more. Not just in the big things, but in the little things as well, all right? What wins the victory is faith. You ought to write that down. You win every time when you trust Jesus. As difficult as the decision may be, you're going to come out on top every single time. Willpower doesn't work. If it did, you'd already be over whatever it is. But willpower's not enough. God tells us that on this earth, you're never going to be sinless. But you know what? You can sin less. You can. All right? You're never going to reach perfection. Not until we get to heaven, okay? But you can be less distracted by learning how to handle temptation. All right? Now, I'm going to share with you some of the things in God's Word that will help to keep you on track when you're faced with temptation and to help you to overcome some bad habits. And as I thought about this, this is just Recovery 101. I'm just going to say that. But also, like I said a while ago, when you begin to honor God and you begin to experience some of these things I'm going to share with you, and you counter temptation and move away from those things, man, your faith is going to grow in Him. You're going to see, hey, man, because God showed up yesterday, is He not going to show up today? And that's what we all want to experience in our lives. To know beyond a shadow of a doubt He's going to take care of us, whatever happens. So let me share a few things with you about countering temptation and just handling it before the sin creeps into our life, the wrongdoing, however you want to address it. So this is how to have faith that honors God. How to have a faith that honors God by tackling temptation. The first thing is I need to know my default coping mechanisms. That's a mouthful, isn't it? You might want to write that down. I think we have that up there. I need to know my default coping mechanisms. You need to know and recognize all the things in your life that trips you up, that makes you stumble. What are my default coping mechanisms? My tendencies when I get stressed out, when I'm up against a hard decision, a tough decision. Well, Hebrews 12:1 says this, and these are instructions for us. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. He's talking about getting on with your purpose, and he's talking about spiritual growth here. And growing in faith and learning to trust God is a huge part of your spiritual growth. All right, we should move away from anything in our life that gets in the way, especially the sins that so easily trip us up. You ought to write that down from Hebrews. Look, each of us tend to trip up in particular areas over and over again in our lives. Would you agree with that? I mean, I do. I know. We keep doing it. And we say things like, "Why'd I do that? Why'd I say that?" You know, that's the persistent sin. All right, that's the distraction even. More so the temptation, all right? But that's your default, by the way. All right? What's temptation? Temptation is any distraction. It's a distraction to do something wrong rather than do the next right thing. It really is. To do something that's self-defeating rather than doing something that honors Jesus is doing something that is the right thing to do, not something that moves us away from Jesus. All right? When we're stressed, we all resort to different coping mechanisms. I put a few of them up on the screen for you. Food, sleep, shopping. Look over that list right there. All right? Gambling, drugs, alcohol. Talked a lot about alcohol. There's nothing wrong with alcohol. Nothing wrong with you taking a drink every now and then. Besides the fact that if you drink too much, it makes you stupid, all right? I don't have a problem saying that. It just does, you know. But we get involved in a lot of stuff. Controlling, isolating, sleep. When we get stressed, we sleep. I just want to get in bed. You know, I can sleep and not have to deal with anything. I can. And look, if you're already not, you can become addicted to some of these things. And they'll only increase and get worse in your life if you don't learn how to deal with them. So I need to know, what are those predictable areas? What's my go-to coping mechanism? What is it? And you know what it is. You know what it is. Write it down in private, all right? Write it down in private. What's my default coping mechanism? Next, I need to know what my triggers are. I need to know what my triggers are. All of us have things that trigger us. If you're going to overcome things that keep causing you to stumble, you're going to need to know your emotional triggers. And I call them emotional triggers for a reason. Those are the things that make us vulnerable to temptation and that coping mechanism that we keep going to for comfort. Now, I want you to listen to me closely, all right? A key to defeating temptation, and this is whatever it is that gets to you before the actual sin or wrongdoing, all right? The key to defeating temptation is not to focus on the behaviors that you don't like, but focus on your actions, all right? I said that wrong. Don't focus on your actions. Instead, focus on your feelings and your emotions. What are you feeling? Because you know what you're thinking, what are you thinking? Because that's what's causing you to trip and stumble. It is. That's what's causing the action. So you want to recognize what are the emotional feelings, or what are those things that trigger you, that cause you to feel and stir up emotions, all right? Every action is caused by an emotion. And every emotion is caused by a thought. And if you want to change the way you act, you've got to change the way that you feel. And that takes a little processing, all right? And if you want to change the way you feel, you've got to change the way that you think. That's God's change process for us, okay? It all starts in the brain. I don't have time to get into all that, but if you want to know more about it, go look at the second message on anger that's out on the website, and you'll get a better understanding of what I'm talking about. Now, the enemy plays on your emotions. Yes, he does. So do advertisers too. They get your attention. You know, you get hooked by your feelings and your emotions. And by the way, if you don't know, do you know what the common foothold is that Satan uses to get you to stumble and to trip you up? You know what that is? It's negativity. It's negativity. When you're negative, it gives the enemy a foothold. It does. That's why the Bible tells us to guard our heart above everything else, because it determines the course of your life. It determines the direction of your life. All right? It affects everything that you do. In the Bible, the heart is a metaphor for the center of our emotions and our feelings. And we know this, we understand this, even though we know that our emotions are up here. They're in our head. This is where they come out. But we still say things like, you know, I love you with all my heart, or this is my heart's desire to do this or to do that. What we're talking about is our passions and our emotions. But you're much more vulnerable to temptation when you're stirred up and your emotions are heightened. All right? When you're emotionally charged, I mean, you're a lot more vulnerable. All of us are. And they become your triggers. Here's a few to consider. I put these up on the screen too. What triggers me? What triggers you? You got to know these things. What do you default to? And I'm going to get to this in a minute, but this answers the question of when. All right? For most people, when you're physically exhausted, you're more tempted. I am. I know that. I get tired. Man, I have to really, really watch myself. I do. You got to make sure you get enough sleep. You got to make sure that you exercise. You got to make sure you eat right. All right? If you don't, you're going to wear yourself out. You're going to wear yourself down. Others get tempted when they're discouraged. When they're discouraged, they're uncomfortable, they're bored, they're discontented. So some people are tempted by other people. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, you just can't say no to them when you're around them. But you have to identify your triggers. What are they? Here's just a few up here. Are you hurt, resentful, wounded, whatever? Are you grieving? Grief, we was talking about grief just a little while ago. Man, you talk about a trigger, man, it triggers some emotions. It does. And can cause temptation that can cause you to do the wrong thing. All right, but what are your triggers? Identify those things. Identify those things. Here's the third thing. Here's the third thing. I need to learn my patterns. What are my patterns? Each of us have unique patterns that cause us to get into trouble, that tempt us. All right, just like you have a unique fingerprint. All right, or just like no two snowflakes are alike. We don't have a lot of snow here in the South. Hoping we get some here shortly, but no two human beings are alike. All right, no, even identical twins are different. But you also have a unique susceptibility to certain temptations, each and every one of us. Some that don't bother other people. I'll give you an example here. I mean, I don't mind going to a restaurant and sitting in the bar area. All right, but Renee, it bothers her. It does. I mean, when we go out to eat, if we have to sit, I mean, all restaurants have a bar. She will intentionally sit with her back to the bar. And I applaud her for that. She knows her patterns. She knows her triggers. She knows those unique qualities that push her to the edge, all right? So there are certain situations that tempt you that don't tempt other people. And you may be thinking, Brad, you're talking about triggers here. Yeah, and they can be. But if you have a problem with drinking, all right, and you have a pattern with being around it long enough, guess what's going to happen? You're going to take a drink eventually. Watch and look for the patterns. The devil knows what your patterns are. You should know what they are. You should. Because by identifying your patterns, you can avoid situations and the triggers and the unhealthiness of the coping mechanisms. All right? Yeah, you need to know what tempts you, and you need to know why it tempts you. All right? And you need to know when and where and the other details. All right? Those are all good questions to ask. And we're going to get there in a minute. I'm going to go through them with you. The Proverbs 14:8 says this, the wise man looks ahead. The wise man looks ahead. Look ahead. Know the ins and outs of gaining wisdom. All right? Be wise. All right? Be wise and do what? Make a plan. Make a plan. That's what Solomon's telling us here. A wise man looks ahead so he can plan. And look, don't try to justify in your mind when you know your heart's wrong. You can't trust your heart, all right? Mature people are self-aware of their patterns, all right? This has everything to do with developing a good routine as well so that you're not caught off guard. We've been talking about this. We need a routine. Let me give you 5 questions here that you can write down. We're going to leave them up here for a moment. I'd encourage you to write these down and do a little self-evaluation. This is the when, where, who, what, and how that I just mentioned. All right? When I'm most tempted, which day of the week is it? What time of day is it? What's going on? Is it the morning? Is it noon? Late at night? Which is it? And you need to know where you're most tempted as well. And if it's a problem for you, avoid those places. You don't want to get burned, okay? Don't play with fire. You don't go to the bar and eat peanuts and pretzels, all right, if you have a drinking problem. You just don't. All right? Who's with me? Who am I hanging with? Who am I hanging with? All right? These are important questions. All of these are important questions to avoid the temptation before sin sets in. Are you most tempted when you're alone? Are you most tempted when you're with certain people, certain individuals, co-workers, whoever it may be? Like I said, you need to know these things. This is a good question. What's the temporary benefit? What's the temporary benefit for me? Whatever, okay? If I give in to drinking, is it comfort? Does it make me a little more fearless and bold? It's an honest question. Look, there's a payoff for everything. We don't do anything in our lives that there's not a payoff for. There isn't. We don't do anything we don't get rewarded for. Hebrews 11 tells us this, that sin's pleasurable. All right? If it wasn't, nobody'd do it. Okay? If it hurt, nobody'd do it if it was painful. All right? So what's the payoff in the self-defeating behavior? What is it? All right? It's very important that you know the emotional triggers, the physical triggers and patterns in your life. What makes you vulnerable? What makes you vulnerable? These are good questions for you to sit down and ask from time to time so that you can eradicate the temptation before the problem, before you even get to the problem, whatever it is. All right? Do away with the temptation. The next thing, number 4, is I can plan to avoid those situations. Now, Proverbs clearly tells us in chapter 4, verses 26 and 27, it says, plan carefully what you do. We've used these verses lately. All right? It says, avoid evil, and I've told you what that word means there, and it applies here. It says, and walk straight ahead. Walk on a straight path, and don't sidestep. All right? Stay on the straight and narrow. In other words, if you know you're going to be tempted to get angry, to lie, to control, to drink, you can make a plan in advance to avoid those things. All right? If I'm trying to diet, I'm not going to meet somebody at Scoops. That's probably not going to work out for you, right? Probably not, all right? It's not. All right? If you're on a diet, you know what you can do? You can plan. Plan in advance. Carry some healthy snacks with you. You can, all right? My friend used to say this, you hang out at a barbershop long enough, you're going to eventually get a haircut. You're going to get your hair did, girls. You just are. All right, look, if you have to drive 20 miles out of the way to avoid the liquor store, that's making a plan in advance if you've got a problem drinking. All right, it takes what it takes. It takes what it takes, all right? You need to have a plan in advance. In advance is the key words there, all right? You don't struggle. If you struggle with alcohol, you don't go to the bar. You don't. Not to watch the game, watch Georgia lose. I hate they lost, but if you have a problem with pornography, you know what you do? You make a plan. You put some accountability software on your internet and on your phones. All right? You make a plan to avoid the temptation. All right? But sometimes, you know what? You're going to get hit out of the blue. You just are. Things are going to come up unexpectedly, despite the best planning. All right? And that's when you need to use some emergency tactics. And here's a big one. Here's a big one. You ask God to help you. That's the first one. Now look, I'm going to say this before I get into this and we wind down. Sometimes going to God in prayer is a Christian's lazy way of doing things. I'll just pray about it. So it's real. It should be the first thing we do about everything. It's not just real, it is a must in our lives. It is an absolute must that we're in constant contact with God. Like I said a while ago, He loves us. He does. He's willing and He's waiting and He wants to help us. And that should be our first stop, our first go-to. Now sometimes you just don't have a long time to say this elaborate prayer when you're caught off guard. And first of all, I don't know how much God's into elaborate prayers. He just wants to talk with you, just like we talk, okay? But we do it in a reverent manner. But just tell Him what's on your mind, okay? But sometimes we're caught off guard and you don't know what to pray. And I've said this often, I've got some crazy looks. Just say, God help me. I said that a while ago in our opening prayer. All right? Look, the Bible is literally full of men who did this in their lives, like David and Daniel and Peter and Paul, who said those type of prayers. They were just short and sweet. God, I need your help, and I need it now. Please intervene. Help me. I'm being tempted here. Like Renee says, I want to jack slap that person. You know what I'm talking about. Psalms 50 tells us this. It says, God says, call on me. Call on me when you're in trouble. And He says what? I will save you. I'll be there for you every single time. And that call sometimes, it's a literal cry for help. Help me, God, help me. I need you now. That's the emergency tactic. It is. And yeah, you know what? You need to plan to avoid temptation that sometimes comes out of left field. Now, why can I expect God to help me? Why can I expect God to help me? First of all, He loves you. He loves you. His love for you is the major theme of the Bible. The Bible is His love letter to each and every one of us. It is. He loves you. All right? Get this though. He understands you. He understands first and foremost that you're human. You're spirit, but you're human. Okay? And He understands that, and He wants to help you. He wants to help you, especially when you're doing your best to honor Him. He smiles down on you like crazy, man. Yes, I'm going to give you the grace that you need, but here's an extra dose of my Spirit. I mean, I don't know about you, but I need that at times. I do. I need God to come through in a way that I know I can't do it on my own. And you know what? He will come through for you every single time when you put Him first. Hebrews 4:15 and 16 says this. Yeah, we got it up. Good. Good. Jesus understands our weakness. God understands what we're up against here on this earth. Not a single thing gets by Him. He knows everything. For He Himself, Jesus, was faced with the same temptations. They were. Yet He did not sin. So let us come boldly to our gracious God. Come boldly to the throne of God. And there we will receive mercy and grace to help us when we need it. I love that verse. I love that verse. Did you know Jesus was tempted? Yet He didn't sin. Was Jesus ever tempted to be discouraged, prideful, or to retaliate? Was he ever tempted sexually? Yes, He was. Because He was human and God. He was. All right? And the Bible says that we need to call on Him because He's faced that same temptation and He'll give us a way out. He will. He knows how to overcome it. And real quickly as I wrap up, another emergency tactic is other people, other Christians. Again, who are you hanging with? We need to have 2 or 3 people here at Hope Church. Hey, we can get on the phone when we're tempted. Before the act, all right? Before you do whatever, okay? You still have the option to do that after you talk to somebody, okay? But pick up that 1,000-pound brick that you carry around and dial the number first. And that's why you need 2 or 3, okay? Because not everybody's going to be available all the time, all right? So dial until you get somebody and say, hey, I'm tempted. I'm praying right now. That may just be how God answers your prayer. It might be. This morning, I want you to think about this. Especially if you're troubled. You're facing a big decision, whatever it is. You're tempted like crazy all the time. And in this culture, temptation is everywhere. It is. I want you to think about this. Change is possible. Change is possible. And you don't have to stay the same. You don't have to stay the same. Even if you're in a situation where bad behavior is not an option for you, whatever that may be, okay, you don't have to stay the same. It's never too late to start over. In the middle of uncertainty, God's promised to help us, every single one of us. And each week, we do something very unique here. We rededicate ourselves. We ought to do that every day. Sometimes I do it multiple times a day. I just have to. We're going to do it right now.